I'm Dr. Erica Bove, and welcome to the Love and Science podcast. I'm your host, and also the founder of Love and Science, Thriving Through Infertility. I'm so excited you're here today. With over a decade of experience helping thousands of women just like you, I empower professional women to build their families with confidence and compassion. Let's dive in. Hello, my loves, and welcome back to the Love and Science podcast. Today, I wanted to talk about something I get asked about literally every single day, and that's why won't my period come when it's supposed to? I think it's really, really important that we look at not just this question, but also what it represents for us on the fertility journey, because I think that it is one of the most irritating, frustrating things that can happen, especially when you've already scheduled your life around things happening on a certain timeline. And I really wanted to help anyone listening to this episode take back some of their power in terms of this situation. Okay, so let's just sort of paint the picture. You are scheduled for an IVF cycle before the holidays, before all the lab shutdown happens, and you're expecting your period by a certain date. The nurses have told you that if it doesn't come by this date, that you are not going to be able to cycle. You've already lightened up your clinic, your ORs, your entire life essentially. And you know that if you don't get in this month, that it's going to cause unnecessary delays. Like you might not get to cycle until January, or it's going to delay your embryo transfer eventually. And you were hoping to get in by a certain timeline. All these different things, or maybe there's something even more sort of significant in terms of how things work for you. Like perhaps your insurance is changing in January, or perhaps you're moving due to a fellowship opportunity or a new job. All these things sort of make this reality of the period not coming seem ever so problematic and really distressing. So, one thing I would say is, as a coach, we learn to shine a light on the thoughts and the feelings so that we can then understand what they actually are and then get some power over them. So what I would say is, like, as we're thinking about, why is this particular event so distressing? Like I said, every single day I get a text or a DM or something like, can you just make this happen? And hey, I see it too in my physician practice too. Like a lot of my patients, they are so concerned because they want to do something on a certain timeline, and it makes total sense. So when this happens, I think the first thing I would ask yourself is, what are my thoughts surrounding this not happening, right? What are the thoughts associated with me not getting my period on time? And I would say one of the most common thoughts that I help people examine is everything is out of control, right? And it's like the one thing that I thought I could count on is not actually happening, right? So it's like that sort of predictability that there's like maybe one stable thing. I always have regular periods, or this always happens. It's this one time. I mean, of course, we know stress does affect these things too, but or maybe a previous cycle and the hormones, or a miscarriage, the hormones kind of get out of whack. But it's just this sort of feeling that like this is not the only thing that's out of control. Everything is out of control, and this is a chaotic, unpredictable process. And for those of us who are type A, high achieving physician women, this can be really, really hard to assimilate, right? This feeling everything's out of control. And then from that thought brings the feelings of hopelessness and despair and powerlessness. And then comes all the different behaviors we do to distract ourselves or avoid or resist or whatever else. And then, the result is that everything really is out of control in our lives because much to our own chagrin, we've unconsciously given away all of our power. So just notice if you're having that thought or even that feeling that just like with this not happening, everything starts to feel like it's spiraling, everything feels out of control. Just bring awareness to that, and I will give you some strategies. But spoiler alert is really to challenge the thought. Another thought that I, sort of help people come to grips with is, my body can't even cooperate in this way. Like, why can't my body just do what it's supposed to do? And I think what happens here is it sort of brings up all the feelings of infertility and grief and sadness and fear. And again, it's not just this one event of the period not coming, but it's this feeling like this sort of shame and this self-hatred of the body, which is like, hey, I've seen 5 or 6 pregnancy announcements this month, or my colleague is due when, the baby that I lost was supposed to be due. And so I think there's this sort of reminder that like my body is different than I wish it were, and it's not cooperating. And, you know, that can be very, very distressing, right? Because then it's like the shame spiral and the self blame and why didn't I do this sooner? And why didn't I freeze my eggs? And like all those things. And so if you're having thoughts and feelings of body hatred and shame related to the period not coming and just sort of kind of me versus the body type feelings, just bring some awareness to that and I can help you with that. Okay. I would say another super common thought that comes up when we're thinking about the period not coming is it's never going to work, right? Like we know how many pieces have to be aligned for this all to happen. And one of them is that usually speaking, the treatment cycles have to continue. And so if the period's not coming, if there's a significant delay, any of those things, I think it sort of induces the fear of like, this isn't working. I'm getting pushed back. Time is passing. Maybe I'm having another birthday. Like it's never going to work. And I think that makes sense because our brains are protective, right? They're just trying to help us out and keep us from getting eaten by the bear, so to speak, evolutionarily. But it's problematic because if we actually think it's not going to work, again, then we start to feel powerless and hopeless, and that it's just all for naught. We don't believe it's even possible, and then we start doing actions like distracting ourselves, or maybe not even putting our energy into the fertility process, or just sort of going through the motions. Maybe going to a transfer, procedure or even an egg retrieval and just sort of already conceding ahead of time that's not going to work. And so when we start to think that very dangerous thought, like it's never going to work, then we start going down the pathway of our own body literally shutting down and all the hopeless thoughts creep in, the self protective thoughts. And the reality is that oftentimes it actually doesn't work because it becomes a self fulfilling prophecy. So again, this is really to bring awareness as to how our these amazing bodies that we have work between the brain and the body and all the things it's supposed to do. But I think that recognizing these 3 very common thoughts, number 1, everything's out of control, right? Number 2, my body can't even cooperate in this way and I hate my body. And number 3, it's never going to work. Those are some of the most common thoughts that happen in this scenario. And these rumination loops can be very, very hard to break. So, what do we do about it? There's actually a lot of things we can do about it. I love, love, love helping people with this. So, the first thing is really to challenge the thought. So, that thought, everything's out of control. I always ask my clients, like, is that true? Right? Or like, everything is going wrong. Is that true? And if we actually ask that question very neutrally and with curiosity, a lot of times it's like, you know what? Actually, there is something that is going well in my life. Or, maybe there is some flexibility in this. Maybe I don't need to even have my period to do an IVF cycle, especially if I'm doing like a freeze all. So there's all these different things that we can sort of say, like when we start to think everything's out of control and we start to feel powerless, like maybe there's another way, right? Maybe there's something else that we can consider. Maybe we can swap one thing out for another. And sometimes it might even end up better than we even could have imagined it. So I think, we do a lot of catastrophizing, we do a lot of ruminating, but really just notice when we start to think everything's out of control, challenge the thought, ask yourself if that's true. And the really what we can control is it's not even in the externals, it's we can control our mindset. We can control what we choose to consume. We can control the people who are in our inner circle who lift us up. We can control not to talk with somebody who's very negative about the fertility journey. So there's all these different things, but just sort of be aware because that one particular thought can be pretty dangerous. let's talk about the example of, like I hate my body. It's not doing what it's supposed to. It can't even cooperate in this way, right? So I would really challenge that thought because, well, as women, so many of us grew up with self-hatred of our bodies, and it's just very, very insidious. Like we're supposed to compare our bodies to other women, and we're supposed to look in the mirror and grimace or whatever else it is. But there are so many ways that our bodies are working for us, and we need to reinstate the trust that with time our bodies are going to do what they're supposed to do. And so, there are various reasons why the period might come. Maybe the hormones were high in the previous cycle, or maybe there was kind of a wonky ovulation, or maybe you've had a miscarriage and things are still trying to get on track, or maybe, it's an excessively stressful time and the body just knows, and it truly doesn't do what it's supposed to do because it like literally the brain senses the stress and shuts down. So there's all sorts of reasons why this can happen, but I would sort of imagine things working in the body. This is how I sort of counteract this one. I imagine the period coming, right? And in the way that it's supposed to happen. I imagine like truly like the cells of the uterus and the cervix, and I imagine the outflow, and I imagine whatever method it is of sort of dealing with the menstrual blood, whether it's a cup or a disc or a tampon or a pad, like whatever it is, like I just picture that whole thing happening. Connect with the inner wisdom of the body. Know that there is this wisdom that is more powerful than we could ever think up, and just say, you know what? Like, there's no reason I need to hate my body. And I understand that the fertility process is like super, super stressful and it feels terrible, but I do trust that my body is going to cooperate when the timing is right. So that's sort of how I challenge that thought. And then the third thought, it's never going to work. That again, that's super insidious, super destructive. Again, it makes total sense that our brains go there. But with that, we really start to shut down. So, how do we challenge that thought? You know, I think that in terms of challenging that thought, we have to ask ourselves, like, what evidence do we have that it's never going to work? Right? We have to look at factors for authentic hope. We have to look at age. We have to look at, previous pregnancy history. We have to look at, um, you know, whether there's embryos frozen or not, like all these different things, what the main diagnosis is, all those things, those all matter. So if the period is not coming and we start to think it's never going to work, just ask yourself, like, what evidence do I have for that statement? Like, what would Coach Erica say about this? What would my REI say about this? Because I promise you, if your REI believed it was never going to work, they would not still be letting you cycle, right? Like, there's got to be a reason why people believe in you, and often more than we can believe in ourselves. So I would sort of say, okay, isn't that interesting that that's where my brain goes? It's never going to work. Like, I don't have any evidence to that. And even like, there's a small possibility that this is going to work. Maybe the brain can't get on board with, like, yes, it's definitely going to work someday. But just that thought, like, it is possible that this can work when it's meant to happen, and release the timeline. I think that's the biggest thing, because it's this feeling of being in control when at least the dates and everything line up, but this feeling of out of control and powerlessness that these thoughts then feed into, that then lead us into those spirals, that then lead us into numbing behaviors and distracting behaviors, and then, just sort of feeling kind of disengaged and withdrawn from the process. But this really needs to be like a hell yes and all in, really do believing in ourselves, believing in the process. And so that's really kind of what I wanted to say about this is, when the period isn't coming and your whole body starts to freak out, just think, what thoughts are behind these feelings, and are they actually true? Okay. So that's the first thing. The second thing I would say to do is, once you've identified the thoughts that are behind the freaking out and the panic and the anxiety and the fear, really hone in on what those feelings are that are running the ship. So, like I said, maybe it is anxiety about the overall process. Maybe it is fear that it's never going to work out. Maybe it's, grief. Maybe there's been a significant amount of loss, or You're not where you wish you would be at this point in time, especially with the holiday season. Those sort of markers and anniversaries tend to like deepen the grief, I think. Because they just kind of remind us like, oh, this isn't what I thought it was going to be at this time last year, right? So really feeling the feelings, and I love helping people do this at Love and Science, but we can't really feel our feelings in our brains, right? We really have to get embodied, drop into the body, and understand where the feeling is. Like, where is it living? How does it feel in our body? Like, which specific area of the body is it? Is it in our stomach? Is it in our chest? Is it in our sort of tension in our neck and our shoulders? Like, sometimes for me, it actually is like right under the surface of my cheeks and my face feels really hot. All these different emotions live in different places in our body, and they have wisdom to teach us. I think of them as data. They come bringing information, but unless we learn to process these emotions, they can really come out sideways. They can make us sort of feel resentful. They can keep us stuck in these rumination loops of these thoughts that aren't even true. So once we can sort of feel the fear, feel exactly what it feels like, feel the texture, feel the exact way in which existing, exhibiting like tension or heat in our bodies, and learn how to breathe through those feelings because they all make sense, right? All of our feelings make sense. That's when we can start to have those feelings not keep such a hold on us, right? That's when we can start to have freedom from these feelings that otherwise would have immense control over our systems. So learning how to identify, so naming the feeling, like, I wonder what I'm feeling in my body right now. Oh, I think it's actually sad. Okay, how does sad feel? To me, sad is like always gray. It's kind of heavy. It's just kind of like sticky sometimes. But all in the heavy, like all sadness wants is to be heard and appreciated. And so when you can process the feeling, which really doesn't take more than a couple minutes once you learn how to do it, and then thank the sadness for being there, like, thank you, sadness. Like, I wish you weren't so strong right now, but you're kind of showing me how much I really want another child. You're showing me, how sad I am that I had that loss. Like, thank you for being here and showing me how important this process is to me. And now you can go and take your rightful place, right? And that's how we do it. So, really feeling the feelings that are induced from this really stressful situation, I think it makes all the difference because that's when we can actually start to let it go. The third thing I would say in terms of not getting the period and like all that can induce in us is just the reminder to trust the overall process. Like, we think that things need to happen in a certain way on a certain timeline. And that's, I think, where the spiritual aspect of this comes in. Like, whether you believe in God or not, like, I really grew up sort of understanding that there was divine timing that was better than the timing that I could plan. And so that sometimes I just had to let go and trust that the forces that were greater than myself would bring about what's meant to be, but maybe not on the same timeline that I would have, dictated. So again, that can be really hard for us as type A women, even if we identify potentially as religious or even not. I was joking. I was actually in church one day recently with my family, with my mother, and actually there was a song that talked about like God's will, and I actually physically said my will. And I kind of it just was like this a little bit comical because we want our will to be done, right? We want what we want when we want it on the timeline. And especially when the stakes are so high as the fertility journey, it makes sense that, we have a hard time trusting the overall process when it feels like the timeline has shifted. But what I would say is, maybe the baby that's going to come into your life is not the baby that could have any other way than if the timeline was shifted. Maybe this particular month is not your month, but next month, you're going to recruit a better cohort of follicles, after holidays and you're in the swing of things. Like, maybe your state is deciding to offer a little bit more insurance coverage and you're going to be able to benefit from that. I don't know, but I think our brains always go to worst case scenario. And sometimes we have to remind ourselves that things can turn out even better if there is a slight delay. I know it's so counterintuitive, but it's like sometimes when I drive by a car accident on the road, I think to myself, thank goodness I didn't leave 5 or 10 minutes, earlier because that could have been me, right? We don't know. So we are not alone in this. I do believe that there are our higher powers that are guiding our journey, and who's to say what the perfect timing is. So when the period doesn't come and you sort of start to lose trust in the fact that it's going to work, I say this is a book, right? The fertility journey is a book, and every single one of these cycles is a little bit of is a chapter, right? And then there's pages within the chapter. And so just say, you know what, like this is the chapter that I'm in right now. Maybe it's short, maybe it's not my best chapter, maybe I'm going to enjoy the next chapter a little bit more, but zooming out to say, like, this is an overall process. I'm committed to the process. I'm going to trust my body. I'm going to trust my REI. I'm going to trust my fertility coach if you're lucky enough to have one like me. I'm just going to trust that I'm resourceful. I'm going to figure it out. If this is not my month, then some other month will be. So, I know it's not easy, but I hope that some of these strategies resonated so that if you're in that horrible situation where your period isn't coming and there's different time constraints and maybe you rearrange your schedule, all those things, the three things that I would say, just to summarize, is bring awareness to the thoughts that you're having related to this situation and challenge those thoughts, right? Like, are they actually true? Would everybody in a court of law sort of say that that's true? What would my friends say if I shared this with them? Would they say that that's a logical thought? Maybe it's logical, but maybe it's not serving. So is it true and is it serving you? The second thing is to bring awareness to the feelings that this is inducing in your body and to process those feelings. Now, it took me coaching to figure out, to learn how to feel my feelings and process them. It is not something that most of us were taught. It is something that I think is actually a little bit more novel in terms of people understanding how important this is, rather than just sort of burying feelings or distracting or whatever else, like that we're better off to feel the feelings. So it is nothing but a learnable skill, just like surgery, just like taking H&P, just like doing any of those other things we do every single day. I love to help people with this. It's actually not that hard, but it takes, commitment to say, okay, I've got this. I'm going to process this feeling and then we're going to move on. And it works. I promise you it works. And even after a 2-minute exercise, everybody feels better. And the third thing is really to trust the overall process. And so, when the period doesn't come and the thoughts come like, this is never going to work, everything's out of control, just remind yourself, like, no, I'm committed to the process. I believe that there is a pathway to parenthood that is meant for me. I don't know exactly what that timeline is, but just kind of like when we release a wish, like you get an eyelash that comes and you sort of release a wish into the universe. When I do that, I never say like, and it has to happen by this time and date. Otherwise, it's not a valid wish. It doesn't work that way, right? When we have a desire and we have a prayer even, and we release that into the universe, there's that surrender where that timeline, we have to let go of the timeline to let go fully and allow the greater workings, the greater energies to take hold. And so it's not easy. It's not how most of us are wired. It's not how most of us get through our wonderful careers as physicians. We're always thinking worst case scenario. We're always like control all the bad things. It's very counterintuitive, but all these things are learnable. They can make such a difference. And when these things happen in real time, we can work through them together. So if something you heard today resonated, please book a discovery call with me. I absolutely love helping people in all these different situations. And sometimes it's the things that wouldn't seem to be the greatest bothers and concerns that can actually cause the greatest amount of stress and distress. And I would love to help you overcome those things together. So just go to my website, book a call. We got this together. I hope this has helped. I would love to do more sort of conversations along similar topics. But remember, you've got this. There is a plan. Release the timing. Your body is your ally, not your enemy. And with trust in the overall process, I do trust that there's a pathway to being a parent, to building your family, and we've got this. I love you. I'll talk to you next time. Bye. Thank you for listening to the Love and Science podcast. I'm so glad you joined us today. If you found this conversation valuable, if you could please rate, review, and share this podcast with your trusted people, it would mean so much to me. If you want more tools to help you navigate the fertility journey, please book a discovery call with me today. The link is in the show notes. Please do not let infertility have the final word. I'm here to take the burden from you so that you can achieve your goal of building your family. In gratitude, this is Dr. Erica Bove. I'm rooting for you always.